Yes,
Okay,
but it's not as a show yet. There you go.
okay, there we go. All right, so this is part two. And part two is reporting for CRF eligible interdepartmental payments and CRF reporting template changes specifically for those interdepartment payments. And then we have time, if we have time, we'll do a little Q&A. So reporting for CFR eligible interdepartmental payments. First, I just want to talk about what the primary types of interdepartmental payments are. We have billbacks and state of Vermont invoices. That is the mechanism that for specific purchase for staff services time on one department on behalf of another. So for example, a department wants to purchase laptops, but they have to do it through ADS. ADS will send them an invoice for the laptops plus any ADS service time to configure. Another example could be departments order 500 booklets printed that are COVID related or not by the BGS print shop. BGS bills the job as one cost to the department that ordered it. We also have P cards or purchasing cards. Those are Visa credit cards issued by the Bank of America, and it's strictly for the assigned within departments that are allowed to use them. And it's a method of purchasing and paying for small dollar transactions as well as high volume repetitive purchases, including non-restricted commodities and services. So there's a process. Bank of America pays the supplier once you've charged your purchase at Home Depot. The Bank of America invoices BGS through a system. BGS pays Bank of America, and then you process your payment looking at your receipts that you keep back to BGS. And some of that is done through the Bank of America system, which Brenda, help me here. What's the name of that system?
It's called Works.
Oh,
Yeah.
Works, right.
Everybody gets an invoice. So if you
Right.
use a purchase card, you get a BGS invoice for that monthly.
Right. Brenda's here to help because I don't know the details. But that's a lot of purchases and that really helps the state save money and also not have to do a huge amount of invoicing back and forth on small items. Now, Lena talked a little bit about statewide contracts, and the reason we're bringing them up here is because they are a form of interdepartmental payments. So BGS Office of Purchasing and Contracting has specific authority to negotiate and procure master contracts, which is, you could use the term master contracts for a statewide contract. And it allows access to those contracts by the departments of state without the need to be separately negotiated by each department. Examples, departments place a PO with WB Mason for office supply against the BGS statewide contract. And what that allows you to do is you do not have to negotiate with WB Mason. The BGS statewide contract, as Lena discussed, is not an obligation at the time it's written. It's really a legal arrangement between WB Mason and BGS that when departments want specific office supplies, there's an agreed to price list and an agreed to maximum amount that that contract is authorized to spend up to. But the obligation doesn't really happen until you access that statewide contract and order your office supplies. The other kind of interdepartmental payments are internal service funds. And the reality is we don't expect that there should be anything CRF related in an internal service fund, even if, for example, BGS purchased a lot of cleaning supplies that they might have put in their janitorial internal service fund or fee for space or property management. If they are the ones who will request the CRF funding, so there should be nothing left in that internal service fund that isn't covered and therefore does not get would not get billed to you as part of your normal appropriation that you get for those internal service funds. So why are internal departmental payments different? They're different because, first of all, the payments are made between state of Vermont departments rather than to an outside entity. The purchase is made by one department but used by another. The state must report to the US Treasury as if we are one prime department. So they don't care if you're taking it out of one pocket and then giving it to someone else, as long as it's in the same pair of pants. Therefore, the state of Vermont must report the obligation and the expense as if it all happened in the same department. So you can see this little chart here, which explains to you, or at least shows you that when ADS places an order for those 50 laptops we talked about, because they got a request from you, that PO that they write against that statewide contract is the obligation. And the expenditure doesn't happen until you, the receiving department, gets a bill from ADS and you pay that with CRF. That's when the expenditure happens. And since you are the department who gained the benefit of the CRF money, in this case, you got several laptops so that you could, in fact, send people to work remotely, since you're the beneficiary, if you will, of the value of that CRF money, you're responsible for reporting that. Now, you should be able to report the obligation date and the obligation PO number, because ADS supplies you that when they invoice you when you receive the laptops. And Brenda, what is that? ADS has a SharePoint site, correct?
Correct. Yep. That's where your documentation is for everyone's invoices and your invoices.
Right. So to the extent that you can figure out or see within your backup documentation in that SharePoint site, the PO number and the date that the PO number was written, et cetera, you should do that. In a case where it isn't there, we'd ask you to please give ADS a call and see if you can ferret out that information. If it really isn't there and ADS has agreed to help us, obviously, with this in supplying this information, but it's your responsibility to report this. You should have everything you need in the SharePoint site. And the same is true with the P card purchases. You should have all that information. You're the department that incurred the cost, and you should have those receipts. So that information should all be there.
I would just add that information includes who the vendor was that the purchase was made from. You as a final recipient have to report who the vendor is.
That's right. ADS is not the vendor in this case of purchasing laptops, nor is Bank of America the vendor for the P card purchases.
Or BGS.
The supplier or vendor is the actual company that supplied the laptops, or in our example of Home Depot, it's actually Home Depot where you use the charge card. So this little chart will give you a quick way to look at how you're going to handle these things. The first column is the category. The second column is sort of the normal CRF reporting for something that you would be purchasing directly. And the last column is how you're going to actually report these things in the new bill back tab, which Justin will explain in just a minute.
So Sue, I'm still seeing slide 5.
Yep. Justin?
There you go. Yep.
Okay. So do you need me to, so we'll do that in just a second. First, I just want to talk about the fact that we created a special supplemental guidance document, which is already posted on the Department of Finance and Management's website. And so we also, as Lena discussed, we have a new payroll guidance. And as the payroll guidance is concerned, the only thing that they changed was they put some additional restrictions on a certain type of internal CRF use for our own payroll. And the restrictions apply to an employee has been assigned to perform work as a direct result of the need to backfill positions of employees who are substantially dedicated to mitigation and response to the public health emergency as defined above in the original document. So if you've got any salaries in that category, you'll want to contact us at the ADM email or just give us a call, because Guidehouse would like to walk through the exact circumstances of that payroll charge that you are claiming against CRF to see if it still meets the sort of more narrowly defined restrictions on how to use that funding. So you'll also be receiving an email with those payroll guidance and which explains this further. So I think at this point, we're ready for Justin to take over on the template changes. So I'll give the screen back and he can take over.
Excellent. Thanks, Sue. So, I mean, as you probably can tell, like, there's a lot of nuances to these bill backs, which is why we decided that we wanted to put them in their own tab. And again, from the Treasury's perspective, they don't really care that we are using money from one department to pay for another department. What they really care about is who externally is receiving that funding, or if it's internally, you know, how much of that is going to individuals. So we added 2 tabs to the template, which all of you should have in your version. The first is this bill back detail where you will do your reporting, and the second is a bill back supplier list. I'll talk about that in a minute.
Hey, Justin, can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah, go for it.
I don't know if other people have this problem, but our little bar to control teams is like right over the tab names. So it's like blocking the tab names. Can we move that thing? Or can you scroll up a little?
Well, you won't be able to see the tab names unless I can make this, if that's helpful.
Yep, that's better. Thanks.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so I'll do that. So now hopefully you can see it. So the bill pack detail tab essentially has 2 sections. One of them is specific to these payments that are made for staff time, as in the case of ADS for a project or a business analyst, let's say. Those, again, from the Treasury's perspective, we're all seen as one entity, so those would be considered payments to individuals. And so here you would put in your updates for this reporting period. You would put your agency from the list. Let's say it's Say Away. You would select the agency that you are paying. Let's say it's Agency of Digital Services. And then you would report all of those payments in aggregate as one. If you paid another agency, maybe it's BGS or DHR, whatever it is, you would do the same thing here, put in your agency and then the one that you paid, and then just the aggregate amounts for those here. So you're not reporting on each individual, you're reporting them as an aggregate. So what were all those expenses? So that's the aggregate reporting for payments to individuals. Part 2 is where you're going to follow the guidance that Sue showed and that matrix of choices, again, because this is extremely nuanced. So here you would report on contracts or direct payments, depending on what that matrix tells you. You're going to put your entity as the principal entity, the entity which you paid or delivered the service here. You're going to have a supplier list, and what we've done is actually pre-populated this list for you. So in the bill back supplier list here, there is a list of vendors that ADS provided. So these have already been supplied. You do have the option of adding others in the case that they are not here. We don't have the BGS vendors because there are over 1,000, and that would have been an extremely large drop-down list for you to have to sort through. But if there's any vendors that are particular to you that are not included in this stock list, you'll want to add those in along with all their details. Again, this is specific to billbacks, so it's not using the subrecipient list from the beginning of the template. We've also included, I will say, BGS in here and a couple others. So there will be some situations like, I guess, when you're paying for Vermont Correctional Industries, you're paying them directly, and you're paying for a particular service. So there is no like ultimate vendor that's getting the money. It really is ourselves. And so in that case, you'd probably report yourself, Department of Corrections, and then Vermont Correctional Industries here as the supplier. You're going to go through and select the obligation type, whether it's off a contract or if it's a direct payment. You will do all that typical stuff. If you know the contract number, it will be very helpful for you to provide it in the case that it was a contract, not a direct payment. And you'll go through the typical stuff of selecting your project and putting all the other detail in. What we are not asking from you for this point is the specific contract details in the case that it's a contract. And the reason for that is because you won't necessarily know all of those contract details. Those details are going to be held at ADS or BGS or wherever those contracts are. So what we will do, rather than asking for a whole bunch of information from you that you might not have, and at the end of the day, we might not need because the cumulative will not be over 50,000. What we will do is aggregate all this information on the bill back detail from you. And then when we find that there is a particular vendor that has reached $50,000 or more, we will talk with ADS or BGS or whoever owns the contract to get those contract details, and we will report that in the appropriate tabs at that point in time. So you can almost think about the bill back detail and the supplier list as kind of an interim stage in the reporting. We're asking for you for aggregate detail because that's the only way that we can actually get it, because ADS or BGS doesn't know which payments are made with CRF money. Only the paying department does. And so we're asking for some, granular detail from you. We will aggregate that up and then add additional detail as needed. And then we'll put that into the Treasury upload. That all being said, again, coming back to this page, cover page and summary. So all of this should add up to your total CRF expenditure / payment. So we wouldn't want to see anything that's on the bill back for individuals or the bill back for others, contracts or direct payments, included in any of these others. So every dollar, again, is distinctly going to be in one tab or another. Very important.
Okay,
so folks,
thanks.
folks have questions at this point, feel free to ask them in the
Yeah,
chat.
I've got a couple.
Can I add a couple things first?
Yeah, go for it.
This is Brenda Berry. If you would go back to the bill back page just for a second, Justin. I just wanted to make sure it was clear that the part one, for instance, on your ADS bill that I think Sue used as an example, staff time, so project management costs or support services to set your computers up are going to be are distinguished on your ADS bill. Those are going to be listed in part one, where the actual costs for the computers are listed in part two. That's one point. So that's specific staff costs.
Yep.
Also, if you go down to the part two, where we're talking about picking the exact supplier who supplied those computers to ADS, or the ADS purchased them from, and you don't find that vendor on this list, and you have to add it to the last tab there, the bill back supplier list that Justin's going to go to here. Just remember that if you are adding a supplier to this list, this has to match exactly what's in Vision. So the supplier ID number, the supplier name, the address, that should be coming right out of Vision as it is as you would find it in Vision. So those are a few things I just wanted to add. And also keeping in mind, which they really covered in the first webinar, but I wanted to remind everybody that expenses only happen once they're spent in Vision out of the CRF fund 22045. They don't happen if they're spent out of a different fund until they're spent out of the CRF fund. So those are just a couple points I wanted to highlight.
Excellent. Thanks, Brenda.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions. Dan Dickerson, who joins us from the Joint Fiscal Office, says the legislative branch is going to be expanding its footprint into additional state buildings we will incur fee-for-space expenses for this space. To the extent that we use this space prior to December 30th, our fee-for-space expense for that period will be CRF eligible. How will we report this since this is an internal service fund cost? Well, you knew there had to be one of these that, even though we thought they wouldn't occur. So I guess, Brenda, maybe this is a question for you. How would AOA Financial Services Division bill for that, for expanded fee for space, additional square footage?
Right. If it's very specifically for CRF, I think we'd have to have that conversation offline, but that would be with my AOA FSD office. And perhaps there's a way that we could bill for, separately for those months that are CRF specific before the end of December. I'm sure we could. So we could take that conversation. If anybody else is in that situation, drop me an email and I'm happy to follow up with you on that and see in that particular situation how we can make that work.
Okay, great. We have a question from Marcy Hodgson. The bill back detail is only for payments we make to another state agency, right? Yes. Or do we include all usage of statewide contracts here?
So
No.
Sue, can you go back to the slide with the matrix? I think that'll be helpful here.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, Brenda just answered it.
Okay.
But yeah, this is in the guidance and this is in the slideshow, which will be sent to you after we finish this webinar.
So there's three columns, right? The first is the category, the second. First is the category, the second is what you would put in the normal CRF reporting tab, basically the criteria to put it there. And then the CRF reporting bill back tab, which is the third column, is the criteria there. And you'll see that for the statewide contract category, there is an NA under the bill back tab. So for the statewide contracts, if you have a single purchase order that's greater than or equal to 50K, you will report that as a PO contract in the contracts greater than or equal to 50. If a PO is less than 50,000, you're going to put that in the aggregate for obligations less than 50. But we didn't see a circumstance where that would actually go into the bill back tab because departments are paying off the statewide contracts directly and not using an intermediary to pay those.
Okay, does anyone have any other questions before we move on? No? Okay. Let's see, what do I want to do? I want to go back to here. So I think Justin talked about the reporting template changes. I just want to remind you that all of the guidance and documents that we have relating to CRF reporting, templates, FAQs, all of that can be found on the Finance and Management website. Link for that is there. Just to remind everyone, you should be able to find everything there. We've done our Q&A. Does anyone have anything else that they'd like to ask or say? No? Okay.
So well, I'll just add one thing. So I believe everyone should be on the newest version of Excel, although there might be some cases across state government where that has not happened. Some of the things that are in this new template are based on some fairly new features, things that came out in June. If for some reason, let's say when you are selecting a contractor from the subrecipient list, if you get an error, definitely email the ADM email address and I will give you a template that's compatible with your Excel version. So that might happen. That's okay. I'll give you a different version of it.
Thanks, Justin. I also see, Marcy, you have your hand up. Is there something that you wanted to add? And unmute yourself before you start talking. No?
So I just sent it in the chat. But the AGO is getting a grant from DOC out of CRF dollars for court diversion. We at the AGO will not report our cost in our CRF report, we'll report it to DOC and they'll roll it into their CRF report. Is that right?
Question you just typed in here?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would, I mean, Lena's still on, she can answer that, but I believe the way that we've been proceeding is that yes, since you are the one, sorry, the one that's actually giving out the money, that they are the one that is responsible for reporting back to us. So they would have to be in coordination with you getting your expenses for them to report back to us, because it's a DOC appropriation.
Okay, any other hand raises or questions? Team, are we done?
I believe so.
Okay,
Yes, I think
Well,
so.
I believe we are.
sorry we interrupted your lunch, but have a great rest of the day. Thanks all.
Thank you, everyone.